Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Kristin Jacobson, and I'm so happy that my friends, family, uh, colleagues near and far are able to join in today virtually for the book launch for the American Adrenaline Narrative. So I see many of you have logged in. Some of you are joining through Zoom, so I hope that the technology is working well, and we'll get started. So as we get started, I want to explain how the Q&A will work. I'm live streaming from Zoom to the Facebook Live event, and this means that for those of you watching by a 20-second, about a 20-second delay. So when we get to the Q&A, you will not immediately hear a response or acknowledgement from me from any posted comments or questions. So to help things run smoothly, please post your comments, questions, and reactions as I talk, and then I'll review the Facebook comment section first as we start the Q&A. In addition to thanking you all for attending, I want to thank the University of Georgia Press for their support of this project. The press has a great shelter with a good book. You can see details in the slide about this sale. It goes through the end of the month. And you could, to get free shipping, order 2 copies of my book, or there's a couple of great books that are new releases through the University of Georgia Press that I just want to let you know about. One of them is a book that I just finished last night. It's a collection of essays called This Is One Way to Dance by Sejal Shah. And there's particularly one essay in this collection. It's called Your Wilderness is Not Permanent, that really connects well with my book. So you might want to consider picking up a copy of that. And the other book that I want to give a shout out to is a collection of environmental essays called Irreplaceable, The Fight to Save Our Wild Places. It's another essay collection that's available through the University of Georgia Press. There's another book that's coming out in September that looks like it relates to my other interest in domesticity, and it's called Mobile Home. So you might want to check out that book that will be released in September. I also want to encourage you to pick up a copy of Howard Ramsey's new study, Black Men, Creative Touchstones of Black Writers, which has just been published by the University of Virginia Press. I just read the introduction to the collection, the study this weekend, and it's really timely. It deals with amazing breadth of African-American writers. So I highly encourage you to check out this book. All the titles that I just talked about deal with American identity and or the environment in some way. And if you have published a book, or maybe even not so recently published a book that you would like to promote, please feel free to post a comment in the comment sections with a link to your book so that we can check it out. My book would also not have been possible without support from my institution, Stockton University. They gave me research and travel support. They also provided me with the opportunity to work with 2 amazing Stockton student researchers. So I want to give a shout out to Danielle and Zachary. Thank you so much for all your work. As I was researching and writing the book, I participated in 2 key seminars, the American Democracy Project Stewardship of Public Lands, and an NEH summer seminar, Rethinking the Land Ethics, Sustainability, and the Humanities. These seminars provided crucial feedback and a foundation in the environmental humanities. And I also was able to network with an amazing group of interdisciplinary scholars. So maybe some of you are joining or watching this recorded. So hello and thank you. Likewise, I'd like to recognize my participation in NYU's Faculty Resource Network Summer Scholar and Residence Program, and the time I spend as a Fulbright Scholar at Aristotle University in Thessaloniki, Greece. Both of those were unique opportunities to conduct and share this research as it was developing. I also want to thank several friends from graduate school for their support and help at various stages throughout the oh, I just got a message, let's see, to make sure that it is showing live on Facebook. Yes, it is showing live. Okay, and it looks like 18 people are joining. So I just wanted to make sure the technology is working okay. I think it is. That's good. Let's see. So friends from graduate school, who I want to just give a thank you to: Beth, Boris, Marianne, Holly, Emily, and Howard. Thank you so much. Your support means the world to me. The last shout out that I want to give goes to my family, especially my mom and dad, who, as the book's dedication notes, have always supported my adventures. So thank you so much. So we're going to get started now with reading an overview of the American Adrenaline narrative. And to provide a sense of the book's argument, my reading will focus on addressing two broad questions. Go. The first question is, what is the American Adrenaline narrative? And then the second question is, why is it important? So to address these questions, I'm going to read part of the opening chapter, which is entitled Desiring Natures. The Jai Sao La Pass in Tibet at 17,126 feet marks the highest I'd ever traveled without leaving the ground. Amazingly, at least from my perspective, I was still over 10,000 feet short of the highest point on Earth, Mount Everest. However, as an American, I was not surprised that you could drive your car, or in my case, take a tour bus, to the top of the pass. At the peak of my Tibetan travels, I reflected on what desires pushed me to catch a glimpse of Everest from a tour bus. I wondered if I had not read about 12 people losing their lives on Everest in 1996, if John Krakauer had not been one of the climbers that spring to summit, survive, and tell the tale, whether I would have found myself experiencing my own modified extreme adventure 3 years later. I continue today to consume accounts of perilous outdoor adventures, and I'm not alone. We live in an age where the marketing and consumption of extreme adventure is all around us in ways we might variously label both natural and unnatural. Expedition kits often see far more concrete sidewalks than rock faces. Energy drinks and bars fuel work marathons or simply provide a quick meal on the go. Dispatches from climbing teams on Everest occur on the morning news, along with advertising for extreme laundry detergent, reports about severe global warming, bulletins announcing excessive financial meltdowns and upturns, and the latest thrilling celebrity gossip. Our electronic as well as print media invite us to purchase a variety of products associated with an adventurous life. For instance, the Sundance Clothing Company, which narrates its founding as a connection between artistic and environmental pursuits, boasted adventure-ready styles for fall in a 2012 email advertisement campaign. Unlike the North Face or Patagonia ads, which often feature the newest advancements in fabric technology with a model or tent clinging to the side of a rugged cliff, the Sundance campaign engaged in an adventure leitmotif, a rustic camp with an old-fashioned canvas tent provided the backdrop for the model, who looked more dressed for the city rather than a hike. Cities are even using extreme sports as a means to market to millennial residents. Yet, while such marketing campaigns differ in degree, they all rely on the appeal created by connecting adventure and nature, a desire that is fundamental to American identity and that taps into our contemporary fascination with another set of related extremes, apocalypse and survival. The attempt to understand the desires related to radical, risky acts, like climbing to 29,029 feet, as well as the everyday participation in and fascination with extreme lifestyles, lies at the heart of this book and the extreme adventure narratives it studies. The American adrenaline narrative identifies and examines such stories' desiring natures and considers how perilous outdoor adventure tales, what I term adrenaline narratives, simultaneously promote and hinder ecological sustainability. In brief, to explore these interdependent desires, the American adrenaline narrative defines and compares adrenaline narratives by a range of American authors writing after the first Earth Day in 1970, selected as a crucial watershed for the contemporary environmental movement and for cultures of the extreme. In fact, the vast majority of the narratives selected for this study are post-1990, when the popular mainstreaming of extreme cultures in the United States hits its stride. Yet, the adrenaline narrative, like the American environmental movement, does not begin here in 1970 or 1990. The adrenaline narrative's roots are deep and broad, tapping into archetypal journeys and heroic character traits, as well as culturally specific American texts and contexts. So I've just read the first 2 pages of the introduction, and the book has, as you can see on this slide, 6 chapters total. The introduction, and then 5 chapters that focus on the 5 representations of nature present in American adrenaline narratives. I'm now going to skip ahead a little bit in the chapter to outline those 5 desiring natures, which will also hopefully give you a sense of the remaining chapters in the book and the insight I hope the book provides into the American environmental imagination. American adrenaline narratives exhibit 4 primary attitudes or desires toward nature: conquering, spiritual, erotic, and risky. Increasingly, furthermore, narratives exhibit an emerging fifth desire, restorative, where conventional conquering notions of desire seek to control nature. Spiritual constructions of desire rely on transcendental religious discourse to express connections with nature and its transformative potential and effects. An erotic desire founds itself in mutual relationships with nature. Composed of an ecofeminist mix of deep and dark ecology, the erotic views all of nature as independent and having inherent worth. Risk pervades conquering spiritual and erotic representations of nature, emphasizing a primal fear or awe of the wild. Risk connects adventure and the environment and is a characteristic found in all adrenaline narratives. Finally, restorative desire builds from characteristics found in both restoration ecology and restorative justice. This redemptive attitude focuses on long-term sustainability. These 5 attitudes, or artful and persuasive rhetorics, are more than isolated metaphoric or personified representations of nature. They form coherent semiotic systems that play crucial roles in shaping and understanding the American environmental imagination, and consequently our sustainable and unsustainable behaviors. As Jedidiah Purdy argues in After Nature, a politics for the Anthropocene, quote, far from being frivolous make-believe, imagination is intensely practical. That is, imagination also enables us to do things together politically. A new way of seeing the world can be a way of valuing it, a map of things worth saving, or of a future worth creating, end quote. Thus, while individual adrenaline narratives are rooted in their specific politics of their place and sport, the 5 desires form significant thematic repetitions across the genre's specialized locations and activities. These repetitions both reflect and shape our environmental imagination. Of note, the 5 desires are American adrenaline narratives. However, their repeated use within adrenaline narratives and in the context of the contemporary environmental movement helps define the genre and the American environmental imagination. While chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5 isolate each of the 4 primary desires for sustained discussion, and chapter 6 highlights the 5th emerging desire, the desires often appear together in the text studied. more interconnected than absolutely distinct. Teasing out their distinctive qualities and noting where one desire takes precedence over another helps us gauge the adrenaline narrative's complex place within and shaping of the American environmental imagination. So I'm going to close with a brief reading of a specific text to give you a kind of sense of how the various desiring natures kind of do all mix together. And this comes from the conclusion, the last chapter, the 6th chapter of the book. And so what I'm hoping is that this example will show, it's a North Face promotional video, the ways in which the 5 representation of natures converge and simultaneously shape our environmental imagination. The adrenaline narratives simultaneously confuse, contradictory, and changing and unchanging desiring natures can be seen in the video The North Face, Your Land, set to My Morning Jacket's cover of Woody Guthrie's This Land Is Your Land. The ad crystallizes the contemporary American adrenaline narrative into its key component desires, offering a mashup of racially diverse extreme athletes, iconic American wilderness and urban landscapes, matched the song's lyrics, and a full range of adventure sports, including backcountry skiing, mountain biking, sailing, kayaking and extreme whitewater, urban and desert running, rafting, slacklining, and climbing. The opening sets the ad's tone and highlights the adrenaline narrative's shifting dynamics. As the brief instrumental opening plays, a vast adventure porn mountain vista appears. And then a close-up of an African-American male adventurer drinking in the view. The ad claims adventure and the American landscape for an increasingly diverse American population. The lyrics, This Land Is Your Land, are sung as we see his face.
This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream wall. This land was made for you and me.
The music's tempo increases and the rapid fire shots that follow, and in those rapid fire shots that follow, we see beautiful people having fun, primarily in the wild outdoors. They laugh while running through a golden valley, and even American buffalo are depicted as roaming free. The advertisement includes cameos by famous extreme athletes from the North Face's global athlete team, including climber Alex Honnold. But even if you don't recognize their faces, you will recognize the American freedom that the song, the American landscapes, and the extreme sports connect to the North Face's Never Stop Exploring slogan. In the advertisement, we see people connecting with the outdoors. They conquer mountains, experience awe in nature, and engage in deep play in and with nature, all set to Guthrie's radical lyrics. As the New York Times points out, Guthrie's most radical verse, and I'll quote here, as I went walking, I saw a sign there, and on the sign it said no trespassing. But on the other side, it didn't say nothing. That side was made for you and me, end quote. It's softened by the ad's imagery. The article notes that, quote, while the lyrics seem to advocate defying authority, the commercial takes a softer approach, showing a kindly rancher happily opening a gate to let some climbers onto his property. And Mr. Carpenter here is the vice president for global marketing at the North Face, said the perspective aligned with the philosophy of the brand, end quote. While these radical politics are softened to fit brand philosophy, the North Face partnered with the 21st Century Conservation Service Corps, which benefits from sales of the song. The Corps, established within the United States Interior Department, quote, hires veterans and at-risk young people to restore and preserve public land, end quote. And as part of its campaign, the North Face is contributing $250,000 to the Corps. Thus, the advertisement combines key facets of the contemporary American adrenaline narrative in order to sell the North Face brand and an inclusive, environmentally and socially conscious version of rugged American identity. It links extreme adventure, American freedom accessible to a racially diverse population, and environmental justice. Its focus on a racially and gendered mix of extreme normate athletic bodies speaks to the ways the contemporary American adrenaline narrative has and has not changed. Notably in this regard, no recognizably indigenous peoples are included. In this sense, the American landscapes presented in the advertisement continue their active disappearance and a refusal to recognize land claims. This land is not their land. The contemporary American adrenaline narrative presented in the video remains focused on a narrow vision and version of heroic masculinity, even as diverse bodies participate. In other words, the video's fit, elite athletes, and models have more in common than their seeming gender and ethnic diversity belies. Despite its deep flaws, when I view advertisements like the North Face's Your Land, I maintain a delicate hope for the adrenaline narrative's benefits to outweigh its negatives. Like David Abram, I see stories bound to the landscape, as adrenaline narratives are, as holding the vital potential to alleviate our ecologically destructive separation from nature. So I'm going to end my reading there. It's not the end of the chapter, but that's why you have to read the book, right? To find out exactly how it all ends. So this is a time where I'm going to check out if any of you have posted questions or comments in the Facebook live feed. So let me see. Are there any posted questions or comments? It's not letting me show the comments. Here we go. So I see a question from Mary Ann. Which chapter was the most difficult to write and why? I think that is an interesting question. Maybe to a certain extent, the last chapter was the most difficult. And I think that was because it was really feedback that I received from the reader reports that looked at, were saying, because I originally thought I had sort of 4 desires. And then in the conclusion, I wasn't really talking about a new desire. And so it was really feedback that came from reader reports on the book that encouraged me to think about this emerging 5th desire. So I think in some ways the last chapter and thinking about the conclusion and restorative desire maybe was the most difficult to write, in the sense that I'd sort of worked out the other elements, I thought pretty well before that point. Let's see. Beth is asking, is there a text or two you would suggest for someone just getting started with the genre? The one sort of thread that goes through the entire study is writing by John Krakauer, and he's probably the most well-known. And so in addition to some of the most well-known, I'm looking over here because my bookshelf with all of my books from this are right over here next to my desk. And so one book that I'd really like to highlight that I liked a lot was Rowing to Latitude by Jill Redstone. And I would also recommend, I thought this book was really interesting, Facing the Extreme. It's Ruth Ann Coker with Michael Hodgson. Let's see, there is some of these probably like the ones that you've maybe heard about before too, like Between a Rock and a Hard Place, which was also, his story was put into a movie. And so you may be more familiar with this, but it's a really compelling story of a young man who was climbing by himself and had to cut off his own arm to survive. So that has, there's a lot of suspense and, kind of sort of thinking about what kind of not only physical stamina it takes to participate in some of these sports or get yourself out of a situation, but with the kind of mental stamina too. So this is a really compelling read. So those are a couple of suggestions. I have a Zotero library where I have a list of more primary sources than I was even able to discuss in the study. And there's also at the end of the book a list of films, social media sites. It's all in the appendix, as well as books, book length. Let's turn to this. In the appendix. So it's another place, if you get a copy of the book through your library, or if you purchase a copy, you can see some of the, all the different kinds of stories that you might be interested in. Let's see. Let me look. Let's see. This is a question from Deb Gussman. What would your fondest hope be for the impact of this book? Will it have on readers in the profession and the environment? I think it's an increased awareness of the way in which, I was primarily looking at literary examples of these narratives. But as this presentation pointed out, and as I highlight in the introduction, we see these kinds of narratives about our environment and this sort of love of adventure in many aspects of popular culture and advertisement and in the marketing of American identity. And so I think it's an increased consciousness of the environmental consequences of this narrative and the ways in which that this narrative both in many ways encourages environmental behavior, but it can also discourage environmental behaviors too. And I think that the Everest controversy is kind of encapsulates, should we be climbing Everest and going into such a fragile environment? So I think that's what I would hope people would be thinking about and what it means to love adventure. Let's see. Rami is asking, how does the American desire for nature compare to the ways in which people relate to nature in other parts of the world? And what I found when I was sharing this research, particularly when I was in Thessaloniki, Greece, or other areas of Greece, was that the heroic journey and the aspect of a kind of conquering nature or a spiritual connection with nature is something that is shared. That's kind of, those are archetypes that many people relate to. The ways in which particular American myths about the frontier, about the American identity as an immigrant story, that particular aspect of American mythology, American identity, I think is and how the archetypes get mapped onto that, it makes it unique to American identity and for thinking about Americans' relationship with the environment. But certainly some of the archetypal elements of this story, of the heroic journey, of a kind of quest where you go out, you hopefully successfully complete the challenge and then return home, is something that's, it carries across many different cultures. See. Let's see. If I wanted to teach, this is from Kristin Alukian. If we wanted to teach a chapter from your book in the undergraduate classroom, what kind of pairing might you suggest for the undergraduate classroom? I originally published, or I started this work essay. It was the first article that I got published. I was a graduate student. So that tells you a little bit how long I've been working on this project. And so one idea would be to actually use the article, which sort of has the encapsulation, and then it could be paired with Into Thin Air, the John Krakauer book, or Into the Wild. I think those are two books that are often taught in the undergraduate curriculum, and they would make good pairings. But other books that you may encounter might be Cheryl Strayed's Wild, or several different films. You might be showing, now I'm blanking on the name of the film, 180 Degrees South. So I think you could, even if I don't directly talk about it, so either using the introduction, the introductory chapter, or the essay that I originally published in the journal Genre might be a way to incorporate this into an undergraduate classroom. Whether it's a composition-based classroom where you're reading literature or looking at essays, and approaching it from that standpoint, or maybe you're looking at some nonfiction elements in contemporary literature, and would incorporate that. Let's see, I'm missing any. Let's see. Can you speak? This is from Cindy King. Can you speak to the connection between this adrenaline narrative and the academic myth that's found in traditional American lit? Contemporary American poetry students grappled with this myth. Let's see. Well, I think what Cindy King is referring to here is some of the American myths that I was alluding to earlier. The idea of conquering nature, of conquering the wilderness, and the way in which this narrative has necessarily changed as the frontier has closed, and that our sort of notion of adventure. So in some ways, this gets outsourced. Well, certainly a lot of these stories that I'm talking about occur in the US, in US wilderness areas, and many of them also occur abroad in other areas. And so it is sort of this idea that the wilderness and the frontier is this wild place, and that's where nature lives. And so some of the environmental critics that I engage with are also asking us to think about the ways in which I'll pull this book off the shelf, the ways in which that sets up this false sort of nature culture dichotomy. And so then you have writers, someone like Jared Manos, who's talking about being a ghetto plainsman. And this is a much more sort of urban extreme adventure narrative. So I think I'm not sure if I'm exactly addressing your question, Cindy, but certainly that narrative is there. Sometimes more consciously, or it's more unconscious. But the let's see. Oh, thank you, Kristin. I'm glad you like the. Let's see. Tom is asking, could you comment on what your research has revealed about how brand identities involving the adrenaline narrative and pro-eco brand signaling compared to the real world impact those brands usually have on the environment. And I think this is an issue, sort of a greenwashing issue, and increasingly individuals and groups who are participating in extreme adventure will connect to some sort of social issue or cause. So they may be raising an environmental awareness, and that's the sort of, and they might do fundraising for that, or it may be, they may be doing helping education for young children, and or working on self-esteem or something like that. And so they'll be doing their extreme adventure, but it will be connected to a specific cause. And this is a part of the contemporary adrenaline narrative, in that you're no longer sort of doing these feats for national pride, but it's much more usually connected to self, right? And the self-realization, that's a sort of spiritual desire, spiritual transformation. But it then may also be that you're trying to pass along those benefits that you might personally feel from adventure in nature to another community. And maybe that's through helping that community in some capacity. And so it's a mixed bag. There was a recent Outdoor Magazine article, I posted it on Facebook, that talked about how much the motivating mountaineer gets. It can be, $25,000 or more for an appearance to speak to corporate entities, or maybe come to a campus and give a talk. And so these are the ways in which those adventurers are able to be full-time adventurers, right? This is how they're in part making their money, in addition to brand sponsorship. But it's also a way in which the adventure also has this corporate entity. And in the sense of it being more a corporate expedition, as opposed to the sort of pureness that's associated with the less corporate funded, less large scale expeditions. John Krakauer certainly talks about that in the way that it's impacted Everest. But of course, in some ways, you can't climb Everest, very cheaply. And so it takes a lot of sponsorship and in order to successfully mount an expedition at that scale. So it really does seem, though, that many times the drive is to certainly the goal is important, but the drive and the prestige is much more connected to other elements, like a particular charity or a cause, or in some ways it's self-promotion and making the person's brand. Let's see, Kyrilos is asking, how does the American adrenaline narrative navigate, transform the American fixation on individualism? And he's asking this question thinking about how popular ecological discourse often shifts the responsibility onto the individual to save and restore the environment. That's a great question, Kyrilos. It's a mixed bag, and I think that's in part because we see these 5 different desires. The first 2 desires, conquering and spiritual, tend to focus on a certain kind of objectification of nature, where nature is a tool. Either it's something that you're conquering or trying to control, conquering desire, or it's something you're using in order to gain personal insight. What distinguishes then erotic desire is this notion that, I don't want to say that nature is necessarily character, but at least it's an entity in the text that has its own sort of wants and desires. Sometimes it's anthropomorphized in that way. But this idea of play or interaction with nature, and the individual adventurer's desires are not always paramount. So that is one example of where we see less of the focus on the individual. And certainly in the more emerging desire of where that draws from restoration ecology and restorative justice. There is a short film called Sacred Strides that, and I'll try and provide a link in the comment section after we're done, in case you want to check out. It's a video that I also talk about in the conclusion that presents then, I talked about the absence of Indigenous voices in the North Face ad, and this is, I would say, one of the, we can see an Indigenous adrenaline narrative come through in how they talk about moving through running as a way of reclaiming land. Let's see. I think I have addressed many, if not all, of your questions. You can always post comments later. I would be happy to respond to them. So thank you all again for attending or for watching the posted video that will be up later for the book launch of the American Adrenaline Narrative. If anyone would like an exam copy to consider for classes or for a book review, you can, feel free to contact me directly, or you can simply follow the instructions on the University of Georgia Press's website. Also, face-to-face lectures are on hold and department budgets are especially tight these days. So I'm happy to arrange free virtual class visits or campus lectures. Just send me a direct message and we'll make arrangements. So thank you all again for attending the virtual book launch. Wishing you all well.